Hello and welcome to Mabinda TV. So this is Good News Africa, where I look at the top headlines in Africa and then I attempt and make sense of those headlines. So for now, I look at the top headline from the Daily Monitor. Uganda: stealing can also be heroic. So why is it that we glorify wealth that is ill-gotten? I think our values are upside down in Africa. So why do we glorify wealth that is ill-gotten? And I think very much the way to acquire wealth in Africa is by being close to power, not by your creative genius, not by rare talents, not by rare gifts, not by rare skill, but it is by how close you are to power. Be close to the president, be close to the prime minister, be close to the governor. That is how you make wealth in Africa. You don't make wealth by going into business, identifying a niche in the market, and then attempting to find a solution for that. So you don't get rich in Africa by doing that. You just go into politics. That's why politics is so lucrative and people kill each other for power in Africa, basically because that is where a lot of money is. That is where money is to be made, and I think if that then is the case, I think if that is the case, then a lot of wealth that is here in Africa could a lot of wealth. That is why we don't have wealthy people in Africa. We have rich people. Remember, wealth uplifts whole communities because it solves a problem, employs people, but riches uplift only an individual. Look at the illicit flows from Africa. It is by people who are going to preserve their capital by stealing that money. Think of how the former richest woman in Africa, Isabel dos Santos, she became the richest woman in Africa after her then dad, president now deceased, Eduardo dos Santos, appointed her as the Minister of Petroleum, as a person in charge of the Petroleum Authority. Then she diverted the funds from Angolan oil and into her personal bank accounts. And to think that the person who, the bank that facilitated that was a Portuguese bank. So that is why I say for every mega corruption scandal in Africa, there is a Western wheeler dealer involved. So basically, we have to have more wealthy people and less rich people. Wealth is how we will uplift communities in Africa. That is how we will ensure that jobs are created. The richest don't create jobs. It is wealth that creates jobs, and I think that is how we can fashion ourselves so that then we can fashion wealth so that we solve our toughest challenges. And the fact that Africa has so many problems, that should make it an entrepreneur's paradise. And I think that is something that we really need to think about. So that's the top one of the headlines in an opinion column in the Daily Monitor. Uganda: stealing can also be heroic. Then moving over to another newspaper headline, newspaper headline from the Daily Nation, Kenya, from the Daily Nation, Kenya, that is expel Sifuna now. That is the Mbadi urges ODM, that is expel Sifuna now. Mbadi urges ODM. So this is about our opposition. The opposition party that went into a coalition agreement with the sitting government, UDS. Of course, you have the Secretary General now expelled. You have Edwin Sifuna saying that there is no way he is going to support the sitting president, William Ruto. So, of course, he said the wishes of the late Prime Minister of Kenya, Raila Odinga, the founder of ODM, is that he ODM field a presidential candidate, and you can see that very much. Raila Odinga founded the Orange Democratic Movement on the principles of a revolution, a social revolution. But then, of course, now since the death of Raila Odinga, there has emerged several factions within ODM, and of course that's about succession politics. Just as in succession in business, when the founder dies, nearly 90% of the businesses collapse. And I think since the death of the founder of ODM, Raila Odinga, there has been several factions within ODM. Two main factions. One faction wants a coalition agreement with the ruling party UDA. Another faction wants to go to the opposition and challenge the current president of Kenya, William Ruto, for the top seat in 2027 and next year. So basically, according to the to John Badi, the Treasury Secretary, one of the beneficiaries of the coalition agreement between the sitting government and the opposition, he says that expel Edin Sifuna, the Secretary General, and for going against the party dictates. But then, of course, you have Edin Sifuna saying that he will, by all intents and purposes, use all the legal channels to contest his expulsion. So that is, and I think what is the place for internal democracy in our political parties? Maybe that is the question I need to ask. What is the place of internal democracy within our political parties? Our political parties are formed for the purposes of winning elections, yes, but what if you disagree with what if you disagree with the party leader? I think there should be internal democracy in our parties. Yes, I know parties are coalitions of factions, and it is not a uniquely Kenyan or African problem. I think even elsewhere in the world, you have political parties that internal democracy threatens to tear the party asunder. Look at the Democratic Party in America. You have the corporate centrists such as Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and of course Bill Clinton, and of course the people who don't oppose capitalism at all. They say capitalism needs to be reformed, but of course you had Joe Biden saying that I am a capitalist, but then we should be treating workers fairly. But then of course you have the progressives led by the likes of Bernie Sanders saying that progressives led by the likes of Bernie Sanders saying the biggest drawback for the Democratic Party is that it went to bed with the billionaires. The party needs to abandon the working class and went for the billionaire class. And he, in his post-election analysis, Bernie Sanders says that is the reason why they lost the 2024 election. But then, of course, you also have within the Republican Party. Of course, now it is Donald Trump's party, but of course, during the first term of President Trump, you had the Republican Party being split into three. The Orthodox Trumpists, those who will take bullets any day for Donald Trump. Then, of course, uh, you will have the hybrid Republicans, those who have accepted the reign of Donald Trump, but want him to trim his rough edges and, of course, mute his low vibrational energy. And then, of course, you have the establishment Republicans, those who Donald Trump threw under the bus and who will never forgive Donald Trump for turning the Republican Party, the grand old party, into his personality cult. So those are the factions within the main parties in America, that is the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So I think we need to encourage internal democracy in our parties in Africa. Let there be divergent views so that we can have politics of ideology. And I think if we have politics of ideology, what we have in our political parties is a personality cult where we follow the leader of the party without ever questioning the rationale for that. And I think that is why you have a lot of parties collapsing after the founder is dead. So that's it from the Daily Nation Kenya, where I have looked at the top headline: expel Sifuna, now embody urges ODM. So that's about Kenyan politics and the lack of internal democracy in African political parties. So that's it. Then I will move over to another newspaper headline. How Kenya became a country's, how Kenya Kenyans became the country's greatest resource. So this is about a human capital. Is only the thing that will sustain Kenya and make it a great economy. You have Kenya has is the sixth largest economy in Africa, but I think also it is the largest non-mineral economy in Africa. You have South Africa, you have Nigeria, they have Egypt, they have oil, they have mineral resources, but then Kenya does not have a lot of mineral resources. Of course, it has, but then they are not mined in a great deal as these other countries. So, according to Anifa Aden, the writer of this opinion column, she says Kenyans are the country's greatest resource. So I think that should not just apply to Kenya, that should apply to the whole of African region. Our greatest resource should people. Of course, this is borrowed from the private sector. Every company says that the greatest resource is their people. But how can we tap into their dividend? How can we tap into the human capital to make sure that Africa is able to grow by leaps and bounds? Remember, yes, we have the minerals. We have coltan that can be converted to mobile phone and computers. We have copper that can be converted to electronics. We have titanium that can be converted to aeroplane parts. We have uranium that can be converted to nuclear power. We have cocoa that can be converted to chocolate. We have coffee that can be converted to coffee drinking chains. But then what we need really is to have our people. How are we going to uh, for instance, utilize AI? How is artificial intelligence? How are we planning for artificial intelligence? Let's get management theorist Peter Drucker said that we are now in the knowledge economy where wealth is no longer old money. Wealth is no longer just about oil and machines. Wealth is now intangible ideas. That is what wealth is. Think of the software companies, think of the information revolution. That is wealth. And now with the coming of AI, with the coming of artificial intelligence, wealth is going to really be about intangible ideas. So now how Kenyans became the country's greatest resource, and that applies to any other country in Africa or the world for that matter. So that's it and that's an opinion column by Hanifa Adam. So then I will move over to another newspaper headline. Burkina Faso dissolves all political parties. This is headline from this is New Times Rwanda. Burkina Faso dissolves all political parties. Of course, you have the president of Burkina Faso Ibrahim Traore having a digital cult. Of course, a lot of Africans see his ideas, see his actions, and they are inspired by it. Of course, he came to power through a military coup, but that is not to be tested. Of course, you will have the flamboyant Kenyan intellectual Professor Pierre Lumumba say, yes, military coups are to be condemned, but when you cannot change a government through when you cannot change a government through legitimate elections, when it is impossible to change a government through legitimate elections, because elections are always rigged, then military coup becomes an option. And I think a lot of West African countries are in that military coup zone. Of course, people will purport that we need democracy, but democracy is not bringing about change in Africa. That's the question we need to ask. Is democracy bringing about prosperity? I guess it's not, because 75% of the poorest people in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. You can imagine that. The poorest, 75% of the poorest people in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. So that was that military coups then become a way to change governments. Of course, sometimes they become more evil than the governments they oversee. But then, of course, maybe we need benevolent dictatorship in Africa. Think of a country such as China. It has no democracy. It is led by the Chinese Communist Party. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party, but what has it done? Yes, they have no democracy, but the Chinese Communist Party has lifted 500 million Chinese out of poverty in a record 25 years. So you can imagine that basically benevolent dictatorship can work if applied right. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party has 90 million members, and I think even the wobbling of the United States, very much China could surpass America very soon as the world's largest economy. I think by 2027 or 2028, China will have surpassed the United States as the world's largest economy. Of course, I don't know whether the mainstream media, Western mainstream media, will make that official. They could not, maybe they will not make that official, but then think of other countries such as Singapore. It was led by a dictator, Lee Kuan Yew. He was authoritarian, yes, but in exchange for authoritarianism, in exchange for repressing political freedoms, the country grew economically. So that's how Singapore grew from a dilapidated and also ran a port city to be the global center of commerce and industry that it is. So that's according to that's the vision of Lee Kuan Yew, of course, the same as Deng Xiaoping of China, of course, whereas Mao Zedong is the father of modern China, but in terms of the economic architecture, really, that is Deng Xiaoping. That's so Burkina Faso. We are looking at the machinations of the country's leader, Ibrahim Traore, and of course he knows his life is in danger. Maybe that is why he trusts only himself. So of course he is the reincarnate of Thomas Sankara, an African leader who would have been the economic architect of Africa. Really, think about Thomas Sankara. He traveled in a motorcade of only just 3 or 4 vehicles, or sometimes used a bicycle. He changed the name of the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, meaning the land of upright people. And of course, Thomas Sankara also basically weaned his country from dependence on IMF and World Bank loans. And for that, he was assassinated by his friend and compatriot Blaise Compaoré at the behest of France. So I think Burkina Faso dissolving all political parties. Let's wait and see whether Ibrahim Traore is the reincarnate of Thomas Sankara. But I think, so of course, Ibrahim Traore is ticking on all the right boxes. He has 10 mega projects that he is following up on. Number one, social housing. Number two, new roads. Number three, national airline. Number four, national airport. Number five, container depot off the coast of Ghana and an inland depot on the border with Niger and Mali and Chad. And of course, here there is a post bank. Number seven, there is a university polytechnic. Number eight, there is a tomato processing plant. Number nine, cotton processing mill, and number 10, a gold processing plant. Of course, officials of IMF and World Bank were in Burkina Faso to urge the country to take some loans. But then Ibrahim Traore told these institutions that basically he has the minerals. Why should he be looking for? Why should he be looking for money when he has the minerals? I think they got about Burkina Faso got about $3 billion from its gold, and I think that's something we really need to think through. Then, still another top headline that is from the Star newspaper, Kenya. Cabinet approves release of 4.1 billion for flood mitigation. So, in this day and age, we still have African countries that are battling drought. Well, this is something that we must be really ashamed of. 6 years after independence, we are still battling drought. We are still losing lives due to drought. And then there will come a time when there will be flooding. So basically, this is an indictment on the leadership in Africa. Why is it that in this day and age we are battling drought? That should be a concern for that should be something of a concern. We don't plan. We keep kicking the can of development down the road. I'm telling you, Africa has rulers who are attracted to the trappings of power. It does not have efficient patient governance that utilize resources optimally so that the people can prosper. So basically, in this day and age, Kenya is facing a drought and needs a 4.1 billion for drought mitigation. Then another headline is still from the Star newspaper, Kenya to confront Russia over unacceptable use of its nationals in combat. So this is about Russia again. Kenyans going and Africans going to be in the front line of the Russia-Ukraine war. So basically that shows you how desperate Africans are. We are simply desperate that we are willing to be conscripted in foreign armies simply because the conditions at home are not palatable. Think of the Africans that die in the Mediterranean Sea as they seek a better life in Europe. Think of the Africans that are applying for green cards. Think of the Africans that are lining up in Western embassies in order to go to foreign countries. So basically, that is something that we must be thinking through. That we must make conditions at home to be palatable. We must make conditions at home to really be. We must make conditions at home we must make conditions at home to be to our young people. We must give them clean, decent, rewarding jobs. That's how they will not flee the continent. According to a survey by the BBC in 2006, 81% of Africans wanted to 81% of Africans were if that is if an opportunity was availed they would really they would flee Africa, they would migrate to Western countries. Think about it, and I think Yes, Africans condemn slavery. Africans wholeheartedly condemn slavery, and they think it was horrific. But then, if a slave ship came over to the coast of African countries, you can't be sure that a majority of the youth will claim the slave ships. That's an indictment on our leadership. We are not doing enough so that Africans can indeed be prosperous in their home country. So that's it. Then another headline, federalism and decentralization without detachment. So this is from Hiran Online. So from Hiran Online, this is about Somalia and its federalism. So can it work? Remember, yes, Somalia is just one tribe, Somalis, but then there is clan politics, and then there is kinship, and there is clan politics, and so whereas other African countries are states rapidly struggling to become nations, but then Somalia is a nation desperately trying to become a state. So the Somalia politics is organized around clans, and so and the clan rivalry is really devastating. That is why Somalia has never known any peace since the overthrow of Siad Barre in 1991. So you can see how Somalia, and I think Somalia, if it does not put itself in order, but they are very entrepreneurial, the Somali people. Look at everywhere they go, everywhere they go in Kenya. In think about in Kenya, think about in the United States. Of course, there has been that Minnesota fraud, a welfare fraud, but I think you had the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, defending the Somalis, that basically that the Somalis help the local economy. So that's it from the Iran online. And I think in Somalia, really, you can't think about the entrepreneurship. Think about it. Somalia has the lowest data cost in Africa and the seventh lowest data cost in the world, all because 11 telecom operators are competing to give a value for money. So that's it from the Iran online. Then another top headline is from Addis Standard. From Addis Standard, Ethiopia reportedly hosting RSF training camp reaches investigation finds. Ethiopia reportedly hosting RSF training camp reaches investigation finds. So of course RSF is the rebel group in Sudan. So according to Reuters report, Ethiopia is hosting RSF training camp. So basically Ethiopia has expelled the richest journalists, and basically this is about the peace in Sudan. So there needs to be all efforts to bring about peace in Sudan. Of course, Sudan accuses UAE of supplying weapons to the RSF, and of course Omar el-Bashir must be looking at these trends and saying my country was better under my rule. Yes, I may have been an authoritarian, I may have been a little evil, but then look at what you have now. You have complete chaos and instability. 4 million Sudanese displaced, over 200,000 killed. So basically, that shows you that maybe we don't have a lot of stability. And then think of South Sudan is its neighbor, South Sudan. Another instability. Think of the looming civil war, the rivalry between the President Salva Kiir and the opposition leader Riek Machar, who is now under house arrest. So basically, I think there is a lot of instability in Africa, and the African Union, what is it doing about that? What is the African Union doing about that? That is what we must be asking. Then another top headline South Africa, that's Mail and Guardian. South Africa should wage a fully fledged war against poverty. That is, South Africa should wage a fully fledged war against poverty. So how do we eliminate poverty? Our founding fathers gave us a political independence. They gave us independence, but then economic prosperity has been hard to achieve, and that is why there should be concerted efforts to eliminate poverty in a lot of African countries. Basically, poverty, we had this was a vision statement 1980 vision statements. There will be tapped water, there will be electricity, every African will live on at least $10 a day, or maybe create and expand the middle class so that then we'll have an African dream where an African could basically an African could live on a 10,000 per capita of $10,000 a year, but that's not happening. Basically, because we don't have grand ideas for development. There is a poverty of ideas in our leaders. Maybe that's why we still haven't been able to eliminate poverty. So that's something that I think we must really think through, and I don't think it is poverty is something that encumbers a lot of African countries, and I think we need new ideas, fresh leadership. Going to leadership must be about must be about what will I do for the people, not how will ride a motorcade of 20, 50 vehicles. It must be about having these school graduates getting a job post graduation. It must be about really an African affording 3 square meters a day, affording a home, and getting a good job, and that having a safety net for retirement. All these things are not happening, and that is why Africa still remains home to 75% of the poorest people in the world. Think about Nigeria. Nigeria surpassed India as the country with the most absolute poor people in the world at 85 million. So that shows you. And at the same time, Nigeria in 2018 was the fastest rising market for private jets. So you can imagine that at the time you have the largest number of absolute poor people in the world. At the same time, you have the fastest rising market for private jets. So you can see that celebrity pastors, celebrity CEOs, politicians, businessmen, billionaire businessmen, all of them don't want to use the pothole road. So you can imagine that this is something we must really be thinking hard through. Let's declare war on poverty. Let's make it a national disaster. Let's make it an emergency so that we can have programs and policies and ideas to be able to eliminate poverty. How have the Asian tigers been able to do it? Maybe that is the question we need to ask ourselves. How have the Asian tigers, South Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, how were they able to do it? How was China able to lift 500 million Chinese out of poverty? That's the question we must be doing. We must be asking. In the 19 at the height of independence in the 1960s, it was thought that Africa would develop fast because of its immense mineral resources, but that was not to be. It is Asian countries that have that have eliminated poverty, and now you have the second largest economy in the world, China. The third largest economy very soon will be India. Then you will have Japan as the fourth largest economy. So basically, Asian countries really coming up well, and maybe that is also a fear in the West. If the United States gets this out by China as the world's largest economy, then you can be sure there will be ramifications in the Western world. So that's it from the Mail and Guardian. South Africa, then another top headline Another top headline, Bank Gaborone. This is from the Megi Online Botswana. This is from the Megi Online Botswana. Bank Gaborone champions SME resilience in tough business climate. So of course, this is about the SMEs, that is the small and medium enterprises. So you have this is what employs 80% of Africans are employed in small and medium enterprises. That is what will make sure will provide the economic impetus for Africa. So what policies do we have for small and medium enterprises? There must be access to capital, there must be access to markets, there must be access to productive employees. And when we do that, and I think where the small micro businesses can get funding from the microfinance institutions and the large companies, blue chip companies can get funding from the large multinational banks, but then you have the medium high growth businesses, they don't have anywhere to get funding. And maybe this is why we should entrench the venture capital market in Africa. We don't have that venture capital, a large enough venture capital market. In 2021, the venture deals in the world were worth $625 billion, and of that, only 1% went to Africa. And basically, this was not even by African investors, this was by Western investors, and they don't understand even the African market that well, because a business that is founded in a garage in the Western world, in Africa, that is a privilege that cannot be afforded by founders. So I think we need at least $100 billion or maybe $500 billion at the outset for us to unlock the SME opportunities in Africa. So that's it from that's it from Meki Online Botswana. Then I will move over to another headline from the Namibian, turning young Namibians business ideas into impact. That is from the Namibian, turning young Namibians business ideas into impact. So that's about ideas. So how do we bring these ideas to be flourishing businesses? Once again, venture capital. We need an entrenched venture capital market that could provide access to affordable credit that is in exchange for equity. Because if you want debt financing, what banks provide is debt financing, and that is really for businesses that have been in operation for at least maybe 2 or 3 years. But a business that is still at the idea stage, the way to fund it is through venture capital. That is the way to fund such a business. And the business model of venture capital is that they fund many small ideas, and they found many ideas, hundreds of ideas, and of course with little amounts, maybe $100,000. And then of course of those ideas, only a few will become blockbusters. They will grow to become majority will fail, of course, but then a few will become multi-billion companies, and that's how then venture capital firms recoup their money. Think of Mark Anderson of Facebook, who invested $500,000 in Facebook, but then of course that money was enough to give him about 5% of the company, and of course set Facebook on the path that it is in. So we need venture capital to be able to fund businesses that are at the idea stage. Right now, AI is the hot stock. AI is the hot business. What are we doing? Are we channeling money so that Africa is not left behind in AI? The agrarian revolution bypassed Africa. Industrial revolution bypass Africa. Surely the AI revolution must not bypass Africa. We must think of ways that we will be able to we must think always that we can tap into the AI market, and so let's AI industry. So let's develop venture capital. Maybe this should be a concerted effort by the government. If we allocate just $100 billion to go towards SMEs, to go towards business ideas, then I think we can truly create the companies that will create the jobs and keep the world right in Africa. We have a few unicorns in Africa, like Flutterwave, FinTech, Flutterwave of Nigeria. A unicorn basically is a startup that is valued at least at $1 billion. So you have Flutterwave fintech, but that is funded by Western venture capitalists. So we need our own venture capitalists to be able to fund businesses at the idea stage, and this we could link with the universities. And I think we could link this with universities. Think about Silicon Valley. You have a confluence of talent coming from Stanford University, from universities such as Harvard, Yale, Princeton, MIT, Stanford, all of these brilliant students who have out of this world crazy ideas, and then you have money thrown at them so that they can't solve the toughest challenges that the world faces. And then, of course, from those ideas, you have venture capital throwing money at those ideas, and then you have markets by the United States citizens or maybe globally able to use those products and ideas to solve their problems. And then of course you have infrastructure, maybe investment into the semiconductor industry like is happening in China and America. We have none of this. We need that conference. Think of and maybe we need industrial universities in Africa, not just teaching universities but industrial universities, so that then they can and these industrial universities can turn ideas into wealth making, can turn these universities can turn those ideas into wealth making avenues. So you can't think of universities such as MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. At the outset, the companies, according to the Kaufman Foundation, a non-profit that supports, according to the Kaufman Foundation, a non-profit that supports entrepreneurship by 50%. That is 50 I think, according to the Kaufman Foundation, the company is founded or co-founded by the MIT alumni. If it were a separate, it would be worth $2 trillion, and if it was a separate country, that would be the 11th largest economy in the world. So they are in biotech, in internet, in AI, in software. So basically, that shows you we can link universities with ideas, and so pump money into those ideas so that then you have them churning out world-beating companies that can solve the toughest challenges as they create wealth and employment. So that's it from the Namibian. Then still another top headline I will be looking at from the Daily, I think this is from the Daily Mail Zambia. From the Daily Mail Zambia, Kabimba, that is Kabimba urges opposition to focus on ideas and not personal attacks. That is Kabimba urges opposition to focus on ideas, not personal attacks. Again, this is about the politics of our politics. It is one of a personality cult. It is not one. It is one of tribalism. It is we have a tribal-centered kind of politics. We don't have politics of ideology. We need just politics that is centered on left-of-center ideas, maybe socialism, or right-of-center ideas, capitalism, that is pulling yourself by your own bootstraps in terms of a conservative party, or if it is a liberal party, about socialism, about equality of opportunity, or maybe even equal outcomes if you are that radical. And I think this is the politics that will pull Africa out of its poverty situation. Politics of ideas. When someone is campaigning, let them give us their infrastructure plan, their health plan, their jobs plan, their education plan. That's how to have politics of ideas. And I think if we have politics of ideas, that's how then we will elect people that go into office and knowing what to do. What we have basically is tribal-based politics. So you have the voting patterns between the university professor and his cousin in the village is not is basically is the surname of the electoral candidate. That is why they are exactly the same. What is the surname of the electoral candidate? You need to be asking why then is it that way? Why is it that way that the voting pattern of the university professor and his illiterate cousin in the village is exactly the same? What is the surname of the electoral candidate? And I think if you think along those lines, then you can see why we need that. And I think the difference between the ruling party and the opposition party in Africa, sadly, is not in ideology, is not in ideas. It is in the tribe and region they do support from, and that needs to change. That needs to change really fast. Then another top headline from Daily Mail Zambia. Another top headline from the Daily Mail Zambia. Mumbus urges Zambians to reject leaders that are tribalists, still on that tribal-centered kind of politics that should end. And I think that is what will give Africa its impotence. Let's reject tribalism. Let's reject politics based on attacks, ad hominem attacks. Let's embrace politics of ideology. Come with your ideas. I come with my ideas. We debate. And then citizens speak out who has the better ideas, or maybe a hybrid of those ideas finds its way to power, and then we enact them. Let's enact politics based on ideology. Look at Nigeria. You have politics, the North and the Southwest uniting against the Southeast. Basically, Yorubas versus the Igbos versus the North. Look at South Sudan. Nuers versus the Dinkas. Look at Kenya, Kikuus versus Luos versus the Kalenjins. Look at Zimbabwe, Shona versus the Bele. Look at South Africa. That is the Xhosas versus the Zulus. That does not do us any justice at all. We need to discard tribal-based politics and have politics based on ideology. So that's it for now. Till next time, I will do more newspaper reviews. Bye for now.